I agree. You're not moving Cowan and Minton because you can't move all of your top prospects, and they're going to need those guys probably as soon as next season to step into the lineup and contribute on entry-level deals.
You're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah!
Welcome to episode 202 of the Boys in the Booth podcast. Just Cody and Melbourne with you for this one. Abrams is out for this pod, but we're excited to get into a little trade deadline talk. We're going to go into some mock deals for some of the biggest players that are on trade bait boards around, and we are just 2 days away from the NHL trade deadline on Friday. Chad, it's the most wonderful time of the year, final stretch of the season. Let the craziness begin. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, and it's unbelievable to me. Like, I can't believe that the deadline is this Friday. It feels like the season started just yesterday, and I guess that means that it's been a fun one because it's just absolutely flown by, so that's been great. Yeah, like you mentioned, Case is out this week, but he's just on the IR, not LTIR, so we're not gaining any cap space here for the deadline acquisitions. So Case will be back next week before playoffs, so that's good. And a couple updates for the podcast that I wanted to share here. So the very first one is that I am slowly working on the Boys in the Booth Classic ball hockey video. Boys in the Booth Ball Hockey Classic video. That's what I'm slowly working on. Name just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? That's why it's so easy to say. I'm slowly working on that. Basically, we have like the entire day worth of footage. So there's like 6 hours of raw footage, and I've been going through it. I originally thought I had an editor lined up, and that didn't work out. So I've been doing it myself. As you guys know, like, I'm obviously in law school and busy with other things too. So I'm slowly getting it done, but it's not even a timing thing. I just feel like I've almost hit like a creative wall. Like, last year was a really good one for me doing this video. I felt like motivated to do it and ready to go. This year, it just feels like, I don't know, I've kind of exhausted all of my ideas. So if you have ideas for the video, know that we have about 6 hours of footage. And if you think you have an idea for what you could do with that and you played in the tournament, let me know, because I would appreciate the feedback. The second thing regarding the podcast, a bit of an update here, is I think in the next week or two, I'm going to create a Boys in the Booth TikTok account. I don't know. I don't think I've even shared this with you, Harp or Casey, but it's something that I've been meaning to do forever. I've been personally off of TikTok. I wasn't a big early adopter of TikTok. But now finally, like, I just see small accounts blowing up on the platform, and it's something that I think I'm going to have to commit to and do for us. So those are my two updates before we get into this episode. It's going to be a good one, by the way. But yeah, before we do, I just wanted to say, still working on the video. It's going to come out before the next tournament, which will be in July of this year. I can promise you that, but I can't promise a release date as of right now. And the second thing is we're going to get a TikTok account at Boys in the Booth in the coming weeks. So look out for that.
Yeah, that sounds good. And as you know, and I mean, this comes as no surprise, I have not been a TikTok downloader / user since it started. I haven't gotten on that. Dude, my whole thing is like, you have Instagram Reels and Facebook Reels as well. So to me, that's enough. And I'm distracted enough as it is, Chad. So I don't need another social media platform to distract me. But I think it'd be great if we did start up a TikTok page for us. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, the argument is like, okay, you've got Reels, right? But people on TikTok are seeing that days prior to it making its way to Instagram Reels. So a lot of the time, like, I'll send Reels to my friends who are on TikTok. And by the way, we sound 1,000 right now. Like, we sound like absolute boomers talking about not having TikTok, because everybody has this app. Like, it's insane. But so I've run into this problem where I'm sending Reels and people have seen it and they're giving me like pity likes, and so it is what it is. But that's one of the arguments you hear. And for me, though, my hesitation was just, I already post on Instagram. I already post on YouTube. This was just going to be another thing for me to do. But I think my compromise is going to be to dial back a bit of the posting, which I've been doing, over the last couple months anyways, as the semester has been pretty busy for me, but then just like focusing on the quality of posts when I do post it, so less reels, but better reels on Instagram. So hopefully that translates to TikTok too. But anyway, I didn't want to get into like a whole, conversation about our social media outlook, but I did think it was important just to let people know that we will eventually be coming to TikTok. So keep an eye out for that.
No, for sure. Good thing to mention. And another new thing, of course, is me writing for the Hockey Writers, which is pretty cool. And I do have a new story that's out, a little trade deadline preview on the Buffalo Sabres. You can go and check that out at thehockeywriters.com.
And I will say, to build off of that, Harper, first of all, congrats. I think that's awesome that you're writing about the Sabres, which is, super cool that you get to cover your team. The one thing I wanted to say about that, though, is if you go to our Instagram page, the link in the bio, in our bio, includes a link to Harper's most recent story on thehockeywriters.com. Every week, like it will be updated. It will go just to Harper's landing page and just click the first one, and that'll be his most recent story. So if you're interested in the Buffalo Sabres, or you just want to help out Harper with some page views, because as you know, as a writer, you want to gain some traction. Like that's something that Harper's hoping for, and we support him in that. If you want to do that, just click the link in our bio.
Yeah, perfect. That's awesome. All right, man. Trade deadline. Let's get into it here. And I always love this exercise. We've done it before. I love doing mock trades. Like I find myself every day, especially around this time of year as we get closer to the deadline, every day I feel like I'm going into armchair GM on Cap Friendly, and I'm trying to make deals and do things, not just with my team, the Sabres, but with other clubs as well. And did a little bit of that, as I'm sure you did as well, Chad, to make some realistic mock deals that we're going to share with you in this episode. And we've identified 3 big names that are on trade bait boards out there who very well could be moved either before or on trade deadline day. And you watch, Chad, it'll be just our luck that, right after we record this, a blockbuster involving one of these 3 guys is going to go down right after we end recording. So that'll be just our luck. Yeah, exactly. But let's get into it here, and we'll start with Jake Guentzel. And Chad, you have him going to a team in the Metropolitan Division who could use a scorer.
Yeah, that's right. So the first thing with Jake Guentzel that was reported about an hour before we started recording, I believe, by Chris Johnston, I want to say. I'm pretty sure it was Chris Johnston, that the Penguins essentially have a trade done for Guentzel, and they're hoping that it gets to tomorrow evening. That's when they'll be able to pull the trigger, but they essentially have a deal done, and Wednesday evening is when it's going to be announced, unless something comes up in between now and then. So I just wanted to preface by saying that. But yeah, I have Jake Guentzel going to the Carolina Hurricanes here. Not a team that he's been necessarily connected to, but a team who, as we both know, has been searching for scoring forever. And like this would just make so much sense. Carolina was trying to get Elias Pettersson before he signed his contract. And what do we know about trade deadline or teams at the trade deadline? If they don't get their big fish, their most coveted piece that they're trying to trade for, do they just, kind of roll over and say, okay, our team's fine anyways, don't need you? No, they don't do that. They go out and get, they facilitate a plan B. And I think plan B for Carolina, instead of getting Elias Pettersson, could potentially be Jake Guentzel. So Guentzel makes $6 million. He's a UFA at the end of the year. Someone's going to have to pay him. Something else that's been reported about Guentzel is that the team that he's traded to won't necessarily be extending him. So Guentzel's deal won't come with an extension. So that could impact the price that a team's willing to give up for him. But the reported asking price is a first, a young roster player, and prospects. And I guess prospects has an S depending on the quality of prospects coming back. It could be 1, 2, 3, who knows. But when I was looking at making this deal work, I was looking at Carolina's cap space, and I noticed that if they cleared some cap just by sending guys down who, let's face it, could be sent down, or sending a roster player the other way, in Armchair GM on Cap Friendly, I basically said that they could have about $1.7 million in cap space. So call it $2 million in space. You would have to get Guentzel double retained, essentially, to make this deal work. I didn't include a third team in this mock deal, but that's just something I wanted to put out there. Anyway, here's the deal, Harper. And I want you to tell me, for each one, by the way, like, deal or no deal? Like, do you think this deal goes through? Who says no? Is it realistic? All of that. And we'll get into it. Yep. So to Carolina, Jake Guentzel. And like I said, that's probably double retained. To Pittsburgh, I have a first round pick in 2024. Jack Drury, that's the young roster player going the other way.
Yeah.
Alexander Nikishin, who was a defenseman drafted a few years ago. He's 22 now. He has 56 points in 67 games in the KHL. He's one of their best defensive prospect, third rounder in 2020. And Noel Gunler, who we've talked about at length on this show, who I think would be the perfect Dubas player. A guy who is slight in stature, immensely talented and skilled, but is sort of flown under the radar because of his size and style of play. So that's my deal. What do you think?
Well, look, the first thing with Carolina is that they don't like rentals, right? They don't like paying big prices for rentals. So that is something to consider. However, could this be the year that they decide to bend their principles a little bit when it comes to this? As Elliot Friedman said in the latest 32 Thoughts column of his, does Carolina finally say, all right, we're going to bend a little bit on our principles. We're going to pay a big price for a rental. And given the fact that it's someone with the pedigree of Jake Guentzel, it could certainly be worth it for them. So that's the first thing. Then the other thing is they have some really good prospects quietly. Like, they are a really good team right now. They could win the Stanley Cup. We know all that. They need a scorer, and they do have the prospects to give up. And Pittsburgh, Dubas and company in Pittsburgh have made it clear that they want prospects instead of picks, which I think is the right way to go. So, yeah, I like this. Gunler and Nikishin stand out as the two in particular. Those are crazy numbers that Nikishin is putting up in the KHL. I
was shocked to read that, man. Like, as a defenseman, and he's done it back-to-back years as a 21 and 22-year-old. In a league like the KHL, they don't score in. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And talk about a prospect that has just flown under the radar with those kind of numbers. And then Jack Drury is a good young player who can fit into your roster right away, play in a bottom six role, play up and down your lineup, and he's a pretty good young player as well. And then you had a first round pick in there as well. Yeah. So I'll say deal. I like it. I like the return for Pittsburgh. And again, what have we been saying for years now about Carolina? They could use a goal scorer, just a guy who can get you an easy goal, and Jake Guentzel can certainly do that. So yeah, deal.
100%. And speaking of Carolina here, needing a goal scorer, what happens? What seems like every year in the playoffs for this team, they win a round or two. And it looks like they're going to go on a run, but then the scoring dries up and they just can't get over the hump. And, Jake Guentzel, talk about a playoff player. In 58 playoff games, he has 34 goals and 58 points. So exactly a point per game, 34 goals. This guy is a playoff player and would fit right in on this team. And I think if you're Carolina, the way to win this deal would be to not include one of your better younger roster players. So we've heard Marty Necas. We've heard his name out there. Yeah. We've heard Seth Jarvis. I don't think they'd be willing to do that because he's having a great season this year, Seth Jarvis. But, Necas has been out there. But I think if you're Carolina, the way to win a deal like this is to, if you're going to include a roster player, which I think is the obvious ask from Pittsburgh, it would have to be Jack Drury. And then the trade-off is just to include better prospects. And that's why I included the two that I did. And then if you're Pittsburgh, to win this deal, I mean, to make it a win-win, I guess, on both sides, you want to get prospects who are close. So like you're not going to get, like you don't want guys drafted last season, essentially is what I'm saying. You want guys who were drafted a few years ago, who are close to the NHL, who can make an impact in the next year or two, because by all accounts, it seems like, as long as Guentzel gets traded, the rest of this team, like the core that is going to stay relatively intact. So you're going to want to build around them with players. So you want guys to be able to help as soon as possible. And I think both of these prospects fit the bill. So that was my mock trade. And I think if I'm both teams, I do it. The only hesitation I have on Carolina's part is that you're not able to get Guentzel re-signed. But man, like their salary cap structure, I think, allows for you to sign another high octane offensive player. It just, like there's so much talk about Carolina's back end and they've been so good defensively for so many years. But I mean, reallocating some of that money up front to Guentzel for the next 8 years, I don't think that would be a bad decision for management to make. It just obviously comes down to whether Guentzel would want to extend long term in Carolina. They've been a pretty good team, so who knows?
Yeah, exactly. And we know that Carolina, when they have a price, they stick to it, and they don't like to waver away from that price that they've set. So yeah, I mean, this would be an interesting fit, that's for sure. And they've got a lot of interesting decisions to make with their roster after this season. We mentioned a guy like Marty Necas who needs a new contract. He's been out there a little bit. Brett Pesce and Brady Shea, I believe, are both up after this season for them on the blue line. And so if you're Carolina, like if you're Tom Dundon and Don Waddell and Rod Brindamore and everyone in Carolina, you got to be looking at this year as a go-for-it year, because you don't know how different your team is going to look next season.
That's really true. Yeah, just looking at the back end on Cap Friendly right now, Brady Shea, Brett Pesce, Tony DeAngelo, and Jalen Chatfield are all expiring. And then the other three back there, Brent Burns, Jacob Slavin, and Dmitry Orlov, have one more year. So there could be a lot of turnover here. And that's what I'm saying. Like after this season, they have a ton of UFAs. Teuvo Teravainen is one, and they have RFAs like Marty Necas, like we've talked about. So if they wanted to commit to Guentzel long term, they could. It just all depends if they're able to get that done. And sometimes, that might be the risk that you have to take if you're the Hurricanes in this position. So
yeah, exactly. And I think like this is possible because they have kind of shown a little bit that they are willing to go big game hunting. Like they made a legit offer to the Canucks for Elias Pettersson. Mm-hmm. And that's been reported, of course, before he signed that 8-year extension with Vancouver. So that alone should maybe tell you that maybe this year's different. And now maybe not that different, because Pettersson is a bit of a different case. Like you could extend him right away like that. That would be a player who would not be a rental. But obviously he's staying in Vancouver, and this would be a little bit different. But I think that Guentzel would want to extend long-term with whatever team is going to.
Yeah, you would think he would want to. But like I mentioned off the top, it's been reported that the team who gets him isn't necessarily going to sign him, so that may impact the value. So I don't know exactly like who that insider is referring to by saying that, because that they're referring to a team. They just haven't been able to say it publicly yet. But I don't know. We'll see. The one thing, like I guess to sort of wrap up on this, is if you're Carolina, and this is sort of the bottom line of my trade, like I was just looking at at teams around the league who could potentially make this happen and where Guentzel would fit the best. And Carolina just stood out to me. So I think if you're Carolina, you try to do this at like whatever it costs, really.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I would say deal to your proposed trade right there. All right, over to me now with my mock deal for Jake Guentzel, and we saw a report, about an hour or two before we got on here to start recording that the Canucks may actually bring in Jake Guentzel and trade Elias Lindholm to the Boston Bruins and able to make it work. And as we know, they gave up a boatload to bring in Elias Lindholm from the Calgary Flames. It's been a slow go for him so far, and they will look to get him going. But I saw that report earlier, and I just couldn't believe it, and I'm sure you couldn't as well.
Wild.
Yeah, absolutely. But obviously, this makes sense, right? Guentzel to Vancouver. He knows Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford really well, and they know him. This is definitely a go-for-it year. You've got Pettersson locked up now. You've got an elite goaltender, an elite number one defenseman, JT Miller as well. You could argue that he is elite, having an elite season yet again. So I've got Guentzel going to the Vancouver Canucks. Again, with some salary retention, you'd have to bring in a third team like a Chicago or maybe even Buffalo or like a team with a lot of cap space to eat some money. So, the Canucks, you could retain 25% yourself, have another team retain another 25%. So anyway, Guentzel with some retention to the Vancouver Canucks. And going back to Pittsburgh, I've got Ilya Mikheyev, former Toronto Maple Leaf, of course, who Dubas knows well. Yeah. He's got 2 more years after this at a cap hit of $4.75 million. So obviously that's a little rich for Mikheyev, but Pittsburgh gets a player that can jump into their lineup, a player that Dubas obviously knows very well, and Vancouver would be able to get that cap hit off their books. And then a couple of prospects in former first rounder Vasily Podkolzin going to Pittsburgh in this deal, along with Atu Ratu, another prospect going to Pittsburgh in this trade, and a conditional 2025 first round pick. And again, not sure what the condition on that would be, but I've looked at a couple of other mock deals out there and did have a condition attached to the first round pick. And we are seeing a lot of that with these deals that are made by these contenders for rentals or players that, they may look to extend or what have you. So yeah, there we go. Guentzel, some retention going to Vancouver, to Pittsburgh, Mikheyev, Podkolzin, Ratu, and a first. What do you say, Chad? Deal or no deal?
If I'm Pittsburgh, I think I'm saying deal to that one. And if I'm Vancouver, I guess I'm also saying deal unless, I guess what I'm stuck on and what complicates this is the whole Lindholm situation. So, yeah, if they deal Lindholm first, I mean, I'm assuming if this does happen, it would all be happening at once. But maybe then the assets going back change because you use what Boston gave you in exchange. Do you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, I do. Yeah.
But in terms of value, I think it's there. We were pretty similar in our 2 deals. You've got a roster player. I had Drury and you had Mikheyev. And like you said, Dubas is a guy who knows Mikheyev and likes him, by the way. Yeah. Mikheyev was a guy who Dubas coveted. Like, he scouted this guy, brought him to Toronto, and by all accounts wanted to re-sign him because he thought he was a good player, but he just kind of priced himself out of the market. So I could see that happening. And then we both included a first round pick, and then we both included 2 younger players. Now, mind you, Podkolzin in your deal has already played NHL games and he has that under his belt, whereas neither of my prospects did. But I think it's a very comparable deal value-wise, and I would say deal for both sides. I would say do it.
Yeah, perfect. And, Podkolzin, I think, would be a very interesting player to throw in a deal like this. I think it'd be a fresh opportunity for him, and I just feel like he's kind of been boxed out a little bit of that, boxed out of that lineup with Rick Tocchet in Vancouver. I mean, you've got a guy like Höglander who's a full-time NHLer now. He's obviously ahead of him. And again, in a deal like this, Vancouver doesn't have to surrender a Lekkerimaki or a Wielander or someone like that. So, I think this would be intriguing for the Penguins to get a player like that, and Ratu as well. And I know that they got him last year in that Bo Horvat trade, but again, he's kind of lower on the depth chart in my opinion, behind some of the guys that we mentioned, those two Swedes there, and Lekkerimaki and Wielander.
Mm-hmm. But Ratu's another player who is relatively close to playing in the NHL and has a high ceiling talent-wise, which is, I think, exactly the type of player Dubas is going to be looking at. A guy who has a high ceiling that you can surround your talented players with, and then see what happens over the next couple of years. So I like it, man. I think that's a good deal. And I think the reason I'm, so happy about it is because we have a very similar amount of value in our deals going back to Pittsburgh, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
We interrupt this podcast to tell you about one of our favorite partners, Sign Up Expert. If you're a sports bettor, whether brand new, casual, or hardcore, listen very carefully because this ad is for you. Guys, line shopping for the best odds matters, and that's why any profitable sports bettor needs to be using multiple sports books to maximize their profits. Thankfully, there has never been a better time to get signed up, and we are here to connect you with the best promotions industry-wide. When you use our link at signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth, you can get access to all of the top sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. Most importantly, all of these sportsbooks have valuable sign-up offers for new users. And when you register through our link, you will automatically receive the top offer at each one, allowing you to start line shopping with an enhanced bankroll. Guys, it's simple. When you use multiple sportsbooks, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful and profitable sports betting. So, if you want to take advantage of these incredible benefits and support our brand at the same time, please consider signing up for your next sportsbook through our link in the description below, signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. If you're planning on signing up for a new sportsbook anyways, you might as well use our link and support the boys. So, one more time, that's signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. This podcast is sponsored by SeatGeek, the absolute best ticket app out there. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals to tickets at your favorite sporting event. SeatGeek does this awesome thing where they score each ticket out of 10 based on its value, so you know whether you're getting a good or a bad deal. Last time I got tickets to see the Devils play, I first saw red tickets. I waited it out, monitored the price in-app, and once I saw green, I pulled the trigger. SeatGeek makes it that easy. And here's the best part. SeatGeek has completely hooked us up. Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code BOYSINTHEBOOTH in all caps. Click the link in our description to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code BOYSINTHEBOOTH in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
All right, we'll move on to our second name here, and that is defenseman Noah Hanifin. Of course, he is expected to be, maybe the last pending UFA to go out of the Calgary Flames organization. He's made it clear of where he wants to go. There's still a chance that he goes elsewhere besides the team that he really wants to go to and extend long term, mind you. And Chad, you've got him reuniting with his old general manager in Calgary, who brought him in that blockbuster trade with the Carolina Hurricanes all those years ago. You've got Noah Hanifin going to your Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, you said it off the top. Hanifin has expressed his desire to go to the Tampa Bay Lightning, so that can't be ignored. That has to be said. But just from a Maple Leafs perspective, I think this is exactly the type of player you need. I know he doesn't shoot right, he doesn't play the right side, so people are already giving me grief for this, but I think you need a guy in Toronto to anchor your second pair for the next, until the end of this window. That's something they've never had in the Matthews era. I mean, aside from a Jake Muzzin, I guess, but it seems like we haven't had Jake Muzzin in the lineup in forever. So you need a guy behind Riley to play on a separate pair, so then you have two studs on the back end. I think that's what you need. None of this right-hand shot, bruising defenseman stopgap that, where he's not able to move the puck. Like, I'm sick of that. Go get Noah Hanifin. Okay, that's what I think. So the complicated thing is, we've already mentioned Hanifin wants to go to Tampa Bay, but it's also been widely reported that he doesn't want to play in Canada. Now, the thing is, he doesn't have trade protection against being traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, so this could happen. And then I think if this deal does go through, it's on the Leafs to essentially convince him to stay. Like, this happens, seldomly, but it has happened where a player says, I don't want to get traded to this team, and then the player goes there and then ends up signing long term. So, that is the situation in my hypothetical world that I'm banking on here. So anyways, here's the trade. And by the way, the Leafs will have like nearly $4 million on deadline day, so they would need some retention. But probably not double retention. And we don't actually know the asking price of Hanifin right now. I don't think it's been out there, but just judging based on what Tanev got and what some other defensemen have fetched around the league, I think it starts with a first round pick and a prospect, and then we'll see from there. So here's my deal.
Okay.
To the Leafs, Noah Hanifin with retention to make the cap work. To Calgary, their first round pick in 2024, Nick Robertson, who has expressed some desire to be moved, let's say. He hasn't outright requested a trade, but he has shown that he's not happy currently on the Maple Leafs, being outside of the lineup. Nick Abruzzese, who the Flames have expressed interest in the past, and Ryan Twerberg. And I think if you're able to do this, and so by the way, it breaks down a first round pick, a good roster player now who's young in Nick Robertson, and two, I would say like B-level prospects. Maybe they're a bit lower than that, depending who you ask. But that's essentially how the value breaks down, in my opinion, and what I could expect from this deal. But if you're able to do that for the Maple Leafs and you don't give up Cowan, Minton, or Niemela, that would be an absolute dream. But I do think, or Nyes, by the way, but Nyes, I don't even think is being entertained at all in any of these deals.
I don't think so either.
And it sounds like Minton and Cowan aren't either, but I think that could be a mistake if you're not willing to move pieces who won't help you for the next 3 years to get better now. That's just my opinion, but I don't think they'll be moved. So if you're able to keep those two and Niemela, I think that's an absolute win. But the Flames will be asking for one of those guys for sure. Oh, yeah. And you just have to try to sweeten the pot. So that's what I came up with. If it's not Nick Robertson, maybe it's Timothy Liljegren as a good young player on the roster who, has sort of been passed in a way. He's played great for stretches this year, but he's also looked a bit out of place given more minutes. And then if it's not Abruzzese, maybe it's Steves, who's a player who is, dominating the AHL this year. And if it's not Twerberg, maybe it's Niemela. But I will say Twerberg's name has been out there. And I'm not even sure if many people are familiar with him.
I am not at all. Like, okay, I have seen that name before, but just tell me about this player for a little bit.
Well, he has 28 points in 37 games in the AHL this year, and what I know is he has sort of flown under the radar to this point in his career, but his name has started to get out there in terms of trade talks, and his value is going up around the league. So without getting into too much detail, that's my trade. I think it's a first round pick, a young player off the roster, and a couple prospects. Now you can kind of like take a guy out, plug a guy in, but I think the value is kind of there. It just depends whether Brad Treliving is going to have to pay a bit of a tax, considering he was the former GM of the Flames, which I think is ridiculous, but that's just how it works. So what do you think about that trade? Deal or no deal if you're the Flames?
Well, first of all, I mean, you said it right there before you got into your trade that Hanifin has expressed a desire to go back to the United States and not play in Canada. However, we heard the same thing about Jake McCabe last year. We can't forget that. And he ended up, being a Toronto Maple Leaf. And if there's anyone who knows Hanifin who could convince him to come to the Toronto Maple Leafs and be paid very well on a long-term deal, no doubt, it would be Brad Treliving, I feel like. Even though Matthew Tkachuk decided to leave the Calgary Flames and go to the Florida Panthers, we heard the things that he had to say about Brad Treliving in the playoffs last year, how complimentary he was of him and what a great guy he is, and how Treliving really cares about his players. And so I think if there's anyone who could turn around Hanifin's thinking on that, plus it's Toronto. Like, it's like there's Canada and then there's Toronto when it comes to playing hockey. And yes, the pressure is there, but first class treatment all the way through and everything. And so maybe Treliving would be able to convince Hanifin otherwise on that. I agree. You're not moving Cowan and Minton because you can't move all of your top prospects, and they're going to need those guys probably as soon as next season to step into the lineup and contribute on entry-level deals when you are going to be right up against the cap again with Matthews' 4-year extension kicking in and Nylander's 8-year deal kicking in, just to name a few. However, I would consider including a guy like Niemela in this deal. Maybe that, puts the price down just a little bit. And, so you do a first in Robertson and maybe Niemela. Maybe that gets it done. But I guess it all depends on what Conroy and the Flames would be looking for there. But I will say deal on this one. I like it. But
if
again,
you're Toronto, here's a second question for you. If you're Toronto and you know that Hanifin isn't going to extend, he's told you that on trade deadline day.
Yeah.
When are you still making that deal and hoping you can convince him? And paying all those assets for, 25 games plus a playoff run? Or are you going elsewhere and getting, a player like David Savard or someone?
Well, I mean, Savard doesn't want to leave Montreal, and foot speed is certainly an issue with him. And, I know that they brought in Ilya Lyubushkin, and I feel like that was some frustration out of you there. The fact that they brought him back, and he's a heavy hitter,
I don't hate him. Yeah. I don't hate him. He's just like, I just know that he's not a fix. Like he's a stopgap.
Well, he is, exactly. They're going to need to add another defender. I don't think you do this though. If it's clear that Hanifin does not want to re-sign, and again, you never say never. I feel like, Treliving could do this and be like, well, you know what? I will give it my best shot we will as an organization to convince him to stay. But if you don't have that feeling that you're going to be able to do that, I would be looking elsewhere. For example, Nick Jensen in Washington, just as an example.
What if, follow up to this, what if you have a crystal ball that says Noah Hanifin will re-sign for 8 years at the Riley number, say 7.5, the rumored deal that he was offered in Calgary.
Yep.
What if you have a crystal ball that says he will sign that deal at that reasonable number? Do you include Fraser Minton or Easton Cowan, Topi Niemela, etc. Is that enough value in return to send one of those guys?
Niemela, yes, and maybe Minton. I mean, because like Kamloops Blazers, Western League guy, whatever, like Calgary would be very familiar with him. Not Easton Cowan, just because, he was your first rounder in a very strong draft last year, and look at what he's doing with the London Knights in the OHL. So, I would consider that for sure if you're able to have him come in and sign an extension right away, or commit to that verbally after the season.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, enough about the Maple Leafs. Let's get to your deal for Hanifin, where he's going to go, the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's where he wants to go. We certainly expect him to go to the Tampa Bay Lightning, but as we know, this time of year, anything can happen. There's going to be that one deal or two that's going to just knock our socks off. So, but anyway, yes, Hanifin has indicated that he wants to go to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and as we've seen with some of the recent deals and moves that Julien Brisebois and the Lightning have done, they acquire a player in a trade who they can extend not long after. We saw that with Brandon Hagel, with Nick Paul, just to name a few, and that would certainly be the case with Hanifin. So Hanifin would sign an 8-year deal, $7.5 million, the AAV, and that would just be traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So Tampa gets him with that extra year, of course. And then going back to the Calgary Flames would be a first rounder in 2026, because that's the only first rounder that Tampa has left to offer up. And then I've got a couple of prospects. And so Lucas Edmonds is a third round pick who put up 113 points, I believe, a couple of years ago in the OHL with the Kingston Frontenacs. I did look this up earlier, and I will confirm that. And so the reason why I've got Edmonds going in this deal is because he's a very good prospect. And yes, he did have 113 points in 68 games 2 seasons ago with the Kingston Frontenacs. So the reason why I've got Edmonds, the former third-round pick, included in this deal, one, he's a good prospect. Two, we've seen a bit of a theme here with the Calgary Flames in the last 2 trades that they've made for Lindholm and Tanev. And what is that theme? Prospects out of the Ontario Hockey League. Hunter Brustevich, excellent defenseman for the Kitchener Rangers, one of the top scorers. So he's number one. Artem Grushnikov, who of course was in Hamilton. They're now the Brantford Bulldogs, of course, in the OHL, but you've got him as well. And so that is why I've got Edmonds included in this deal, because clearly the Flames value whoever they have scouting out of the Ontario Hockey League. And so that is why I've got Edmonds included in this deal. And then as a player who has been up in the lineup from Syracuse, he's a young right shot defenseman. He's a BC guy, and I think could fit in really well with the Flames and get potentially a full-time opportunity without injuries, like what's been going on in Tampa Bay, namely with a guy like Sergachev on the blue line. I've got Max Crozier included in this deal as well. And I think that he's someone who Calgary would love to have. Again, a young, big right shot defenseman. Give him an opportunity. He's got some NHL games under his belt already this season, and he's a Western Canada guy. So, again, not as much return, Chad, as you had in your deal, but I think that the reason for that in this trade that I've got here is because this is the team that Hanifin wants to go to. So that really limits things a little bit in terms of the return for the Flames, but I think it's still a good one. They get a first round pick. They get a good prospect in Lucas Edmonds and Crozier, a right shot D who can jump into your lineup right away if you need to, or play top minutes with the Calgary Wranglers, and he's a Western Canada guy as well. What do you think of this deal? Deal or no deal?
If I'm Calgary, I'm saying no deal to this. I just don't think the value's there from Tampa Bay to Calgary, because if you look at, what other teams who are interested in Hanifin are going to be offering, they're going to be offering first round picks, but that are much sooner than 2026. So you've got to discount that 2026 first round pick a little bit. Maybe you could argue that by 2026, Tampa will be even further down the standings, and that could be an even better pick than say the Leafs 2024 pick this year, because they're going to be around the top of the league. But I just think, GMs, even ones who are worried about the long-term plan of the team, they want to get things done now, and they're not super patient. So I just think a 2024 pick holds way more value than a 2026. And that's the first point on value. The second point is, if you're including a prospect from the 2022 NHL entry draft, I don't think it can be Lucas Edmonds. I think it has to be the big man, the Iceman himself, Isaac Howard. I just think he has way more value than any other prospect they have in their system. And, if your first round pick is going to be of lesser value than competing teams, then your prospects have to be better. So Isaac Howard is, the cream of the crop in Tampa, but maybe that's what you have to include to get the value there. And then, your third player, Crozier, I get it. There's a connection there, but it's just, to me as a whole, it's not enough value. So I'm saying no if I'm Calgary.
Okay.
Finally, if you're Calgary, even though Hanifin has expressed interest to go to Tampa Bay, they are under no obligation to trade him to where he wants to go.
No,
he has
a
modified no trade clause, which I don't know exactly how many teams are on it, but essentially they can trade him anywhere except for the teams that are on the list, and he might go sign with Tampa Bay in the offseason. Maybe that's what Tampa Bay wants anyway, because they get him, essentially for free. But then you don't get the 25 games in the regular season or the playoff run. But my point is, Calgary is under no obligation to bend over and give Hanifin everything he wants. They can trade him to whoever is going to pay the highest price for the player. And if they don't, then that's just a shame if you're a Flames fan, because you're not getting every penny that you could for a player.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, I figured that the name Isaac Howard was going to come up in this. I mean, it obviously has to. I just, does Tampa want to go down that road when they don't exactly have a surplus of prospects and picks, and he is certainly their best prospect. And look at the World Junior Tournament that he had for Team USA. My goodness! So
I mean, dude, it's coming for Tampa whether they like it or not. Whether they have Isaac Howard or not, they're going to be bad in a few years. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Which and again, you mentioned, how the first rounder this year would be of more value, but by 2026 we don't expect them to be very good, and that is the Gavin McKenna draft as well. So
okay, you've piqued my interest. You've got me.
That's my only counter argument to what you said about the first round picks, and I mean, Tampa just doesn't have another first round pick to give up. I mean, sure, in 2027 or whatever they could, but I mean, if you're Calgary, you're not doing that. That is just too far down the road. And but yeah, I wanted to mention that as well. And if you're Tampa, if you trade that first rounder in 2026, you are top 10 protecting that shit all day long, aren't you?
Yeah, but good luck, because all the other teams who would be offering a first round pick wouldn't have that condition on it.
That's right.
And that's what I'm saying. Like,
I know.
hypothetically, a team like Toronto or a team like even, like who knows, right? Like Boston or Florida, who have like picks that are coming up sooner, might be able to outbid Tampa. So I don't even though I think it's likely if he gets traded, he goes to Tampa. I just don't think we can call it a foregone conclusion yet.
No.
Because if that deal goes through and the value isn't close to what we thought it was going to be, then if you're a Flames fan, you're rioting. You're burning down the stadium. Like that, it's just, and
that's all right. They're building a new one anyways.
Yeah, exactly. So burn it now, and then go play at a college rink for a little bit, and then have a couple teams in the league doing that.
Oh, frig.
But no, I just think you have to squeeze every penny, nickel and dime out of Noah Hanifin, and
for sure.
If that means trading him to Arizona. Say Arizona wants to pay 3 firsts. Like, you just have to do it, right?
And I mean, Arizona has certainly shown interest in Noah Hanifin, although I don't think that would happen. But hey, anything can happen. And he wants to go back to the United States at the end of the day. So I suppose it doesn't have to be Tampa Bay, even though that would be his desired destination. And again, just before we wrap up and move on to our next player here, if you're Calgary, I mean, the fact that Hanifin didn't accept your 7.5 times 8-year deal, it's all the more reason for them to basically say, we don't give an SHIT, we're sending you to whichever team gives us the best value.
Have we sworn yet this podcast, or because you spelled that, are we able to make it not explicit for iTunes? Is that?
I don't know. I was thinking about saying it, and then I don't know. I just decided to go in a different direction.
It's funny. I think for most episodes, I tag it as explicit, but the odd one, I think in my head, I'm like, I don't think we swore that episode. So then I'll put it as, not. But anyways, let's move on to the third player, and we'll get into it, but I'll let you tee it up. But before we do, I just want to say, even though this is not going to be released until Wednesday morning, breaking Anthony Mantha to Vegas.
Okay.
So there you go.
And Jeff Merrick did mention a couple of weeks ago Vegas as a potential suitor for Anthony Mantha. Hey man, good for Vegas. Big, strong winger who's physical, and he's got 20 goals this year on a mediocre Capitals team. So what's the return for Washington? I
just got the update. Tee up the next one, and I'll find it for you.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Pavel Buchnevich now. And of course, his cap hit is $5.8 million for this season and next. And I heard this from Frank Saravalli on the DFO rundown the other day, and it's so true. Like, how underrated is Pavel Buchnevich? Talk about a guy who just flies under the radar as a point per game player pretty much every year. He's had a fantastic career. I still can't believe he was traded to St. Louis for Sammy Blais in a second rounder from the Rangers, Chad. And
I know.
Sammy Blais is back with the St. Louis Blues now.
Yep.
So that one sticks out like a sore thumb for the Rangers, although they're doing all right. So they won't sweat that one too much. But Buchnevich is a great player, obviously getting a lot of interest. He's got another year left at a very reasonable cap hit for what he does. But as Elliot Friedman said, the line from Doug Armstrong on Buchnevich has been, you can call us, but you're not going to like the price. It's going to be a big price to pay for a player like Pavel Buchnevich. And so where do you have the big Russian winger going? And before that, do you have the return to Washington in the Mantha deal with Vegas?
Yes. So first of all, I have Buchnevich going to the Vegas Golden Knights. And that's where Mantha just went. So I hope that there's some extensive salary retention in this deal. Nothing's listed right now. Actually, never mind. 50% retained. So Mantha will cost $2.85 million.
Okay.
But okay, Vegas acquired Mantha from the Caps in exchange for a 2024 second round pick and a 2026 fourth round pick.
Okay.
And like I said, 50% retained. So
Okay.
that shouldn't be a problem because he's costing under $3 million for Vegas for my deal of Buchnevich to Vegas to go through. So Buchnevich makes 5.8, like you mentioned, for the rest of this season and next. Vegas will have about $9.6 million in deadline day cap space to work with because of their LTIR usage, which, shocker that's happening. And that's if, I think that's just Mark Stone on LTIR for how I got that number. I don't have the armchair GM in front of me for how I calculated that, but I'm pretty sure that was just Mark Stone. And here, here's the thing. Here's why I thought Buchnevich could go to Vegas. I thought Kelly McCrimmon might call up his old buddy, Doug Armstrong, and do a deal very similar to what happened last season. Do you know the deal that I'm talking about, Harp?
Sorry, Chadwick, say that again.
Well, so I thought McCrimmon would call up his old buddy, Doug Armstrong,
yes,
and do a similar deal to last year. So last year, the deal was Barbashev for Zach Dean, who was the 30th overall pick in 2021 for Vegas. So I thought, why not go back to the well and get a player from Dougie Armstrong who is, bigger. He scores more. He can also take faceoffs if you need it. Essentially brings all the elements that Barbashev does, but also does more. And by the way, I love Pavel Buchnevich. He is an underrated player, but for me, I've had him on my fantasy teams for the last few years. He's extremely complete. So trust me, he has never flown under my radar because I think it was Kenny from Data Draft who got me onto this guy. He's such a complete fantasy player. So that's an aside. The expected return for Buchnevich has to be like almost similar to the Guentzel return, you would think, right? Especially because he comes with that next year as well. Like he has an additional year on his contract. So I'm expecting like a first round pick, a good roster player, and 2 prospects. And that's what I have here. So going to Vegas, Pavel Buchnevich, and you would have to probably retain some of that, but if they want to make more moves, if they don't want to make more moves, they can probably make it work if they just bring in his cap hit because of the LTIR usage. Now, that gets tricky next year, but I think, if you wanted to, you could probably make it work for this year. And then going to St. Louis, first round pick in 2024, then 19-year-old defenseman David Edstrom, who was 30th overall in 2023. And then 21-year-old forward Lucas Cormier, who was a third rounder in 2020. And my rationale for these 2 prospects in particular is, if you're Vegas, David Edstrom is just 19 years old. You picked him last year in the first round. He's not going to help you in your cap window, or like in this window that, you can fit everybody under the cap and you've got your good players locked up. I don't think Edstrom's going to be a needle mover in that time frame. So I think you're okay with moving him. And then for Lucas Cormier, that's a guy who has 18 points in 45 games this year in the AHL. Like I mentioned, he was a third rounder in 2020. I think that's a guy that if you're Vegas, you're willing to not give up, but you're willing to trade him and see what he can do in a new situation. So that's my rationale. That's my value for Buchnevich. What do you think? If you're St. Louis, deal or no deal?
I will say deal, and a couple of things. Number one, when we're doing this exercise, you're looking for teams that have made deals in the past, right? And good ones. And I think that was a trade that St. Louis made with Vegas last year that was a very good one. Zach Dean is a very good prospect. And Barbashev obviously helped Vegas win a Stanley Cup. So I think that one could end up being a win-win for both sides. And then in this deal, getting a guy like Cormier, he's a really good puck-moving defenseman. We've seen him before, obviously playing for Team Canada in different international events, and the other prospect that you had in there in Edstrom, who again is another big defender, and we know that Doug Armstrong likes those. And again, getting two defensemen, two really good defensive prospects, I think is important here for the Blues, along with the first round pick, because I think that Doug Armstrong would like to change his mix on his blue line. And so to get a couple of young guys who are relatively close, Cormier is playing in the American Hockey League with the Henderson Silver Knights, as you mentioned a moment ago. I think that would be a good thing. And another thing too, so it's good for the Blues. I like it. And then it's good for Vegas as well. Number one, they get Buchnevich, who's an unbelievable player, and you have him for another year. But they don't have to part ways with a Brendan Brisson, for example, who's fit in really well and is playing with them on their NHL roster right now. And then they can hang on to some of their other good prospects as well. Danil Chaika is another guy who they drafted. Another one, of course, is Caden Korzak, another good defenseman who they have in their system. He's a right shot D. And now that I'm thinking of it, Vegas is another team. They're good now, and they've got some good prospects as well. They do some really good scouting, both at the pro level and at the amateur level. So I like this, man. I do. And again, when doing this exercise, when coming up with deals and ideas for deals, you have to look at two teams that have been partners before. I say deal on this one.
Nice. And thank you, by the way. Couple corrections. The first thing is that I'm pretty sure when I was going through my trade, I said that Cormier was a forward, but you're right to point out that he's also a defenseman.
Yep.
And the second thing that you mentioned is keeping Brisson. So those two things were something I really considered when making this deal. You want to keep Brisson on your team. If you're going to keep any of your young talent, you want guys who can help now. So that was the structure that I wanted to do. Then if you're St. Louis, we know that they've been trying to get younger on their back end forever. So it makes a ton of sense there. And then like just in terms of Vegas, what you're willing to give up, guys you picked last year, again, I'll reiterate the point, they're not going to help you anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And we've seen Vegas do this before. How many first round picks have they traded? I'm not talking about the pick that hasn't turned into that hasn't yet turned into a player. I'm talking about guys they picked in the draft in the first round that they've traded. So
that's documented.
To me, I think this is a trade that they would not be afraid to make, because essentially we've seen it before. We've seen this thing done. So that was my whole rationale for this Buchnevich trade. I think it could work out. I guess it gets a little trickier next season with the cap, but it's Vegas, man. They'll figure it out.
It's Vegas, baby. Absolutely. And you know that with the way that McCrimmon and company operates, they are not satisfied with just one Stanley Cup. They want to win more. And would love to go back to back, and I'm sure they'll do everything they can to try and do that. And they already did, as we are recording this, and acquiring Anthony Mantha from the Washington Capitals. And a correction on my behalf, Chad. Edstrom, of course, is a centerman. He's a 6'3" center. I said that he was a defenseman by mistake. So
okay. I think this is where this happened. When I was writing down in my notes, and by the way, I don't profess to be some guy who knows every prospect on every team. I've heard of both of these players, but of course I have to do some research and look up their stats. And I think what happened was I swapped the two in my notes. So that was the problem that happened. So anyways, that's, besides the point. Yeah. But the thing is, St. Louis gets younger. I think Vegas gets better, and they'd be willing to do it.
And man, if you're the Blues, I think you're trying to follow the blueprint of the Dallas Stars. be like to get to the point where you're competitive, but you are just stocked up with prospects. And they obviously had the big first round there in last year's draft with the 3 first rounders, and then if they can add a couple of more prospects from the Vegas system, once again, I think that would go a long way for the St. Louis Blues to get back to being a contender. So I like it for both sides, man.
Nice. Okay. Let's wrap up. Give me your trade for Buchnevich, and then we can get this out basically as soon as possible in the morning, and hopefully nothing else happens from now until then.
Oh, amen to that. Absolutely. All right. So I've got Pavel Buchnevich going to the team that the Vegas Golden Knights defeated in the Stanley Cup Finals last year. That, of course, is the Florida Panthers. The Panthers have around $5.7 million in deadline cap space, which actually surprised me quite a bit. Just looking on Cap Friendly, and I think that Zito again is going to be aggressive and try to add and go for it again, because this team made it to the finals last year. Of course, everyone thought it was a bit of a mirage, and that couldn't be further from the truth. This team is a really good hockey team. They may be the best team in the National Hockey League, and they certainly have a chance. So I think Zito's going to be aggressive. I think he's going to add. And I think a guy like Pavel Buchnevich, who's a big winger, he's got another year left on his deal, and the Panthers would obviously have to figure that out in the offseason. And I feel like Vegas and Florida are two of those teams who kind of have that attitude. They've got some big name pending UFAs, and but they're both looking to win the Stanley Cup, and so I think their mentality is the same. That you know what, we're going to add and we're going to go for it, and we'll figure it out later. Totally. And so I could see the Florida Panthers doing that. So I've got Buchnevich going to the Panthers again. I think it'd be a great fit. Big, strong winger. He can score. He's physical. Would just really fit in well with the identity of the Florida Panthers. So Buchnevich to Florida, going to the St. Louis Blues, a roster player, Luostarinen, who's got a $1.5 million cap hit. He's a big body. He's relatively young, and I think would fit in well in St. Louis. Mackie Samoskevich, who was a first rounder a couple of years ago, probably Florida's best prospect right now. Justin Sourdif, who was a third round pick, a former Vancouver Giant. He's played a few NHL games this season with the Florida Panthers. A first round pick in 2026. Of course, that's the only pick that Florida can really give up, and a fourth in 2025. So when you're looking at this deal, it is very similar to the return that the Calgary Flames received from the Vancouver Canucks for Elias Lindholm, which has been reported by Pierre LeBrun, I believe it was, and you mentioned Chris Johnston, him as well, that is the kind of return that Doug Armstrong and the St. Louis Blues are looking for, the Lindholm-esque return for a player like Pavel Buchnevich. So again, Buchnevich to Sunrise, for Samoskevich, Sourdif, Luostarinen, a first and a fourth. What do you think? Deal or no deal?
Ooh, that is a big package. That is a big package. But I think it lacks some maybe like high-end prospects, and maybe someone will get mad at me for saying that. I don't know. I like Samoskevich a lot.
Yep.
But then, you've got Sourdif, you've got 2026 first, you've got a fourth. I think there's enough there. And if they want to go and they, by they, I mean St. Louis, Doug Armstrong, if they want to go with a quantity over quality approach, then I think this checks all of the boxes. You're giving, you're essentially spinning the lucky wheel and hoping that one of these prospects hit, which, we've seen quantity approaches work in the past. We've seen them not work in the past. So I think if I'm St. Louis, I am saying deal to this. I'm saying yes. just because you have so many pieces. And,
Yeah.
you know, you said it off the top, like, you know, what was the Friedman quote? He was quoting Armstrong.
Yeah, he said the line from Armstrong as being, "You can call on Buchnevich, but you're not going to like the price."
Yeah. So, and I guess this is something similar to what he was talking about. But
yeah,
I would go deal. I don't really like Buchnevich is a great player at a great number with a year left. It seems like a lot to give up in terms of number of pieces, but I think it works. I think the value's there. We obviously went like slightly different ways in terms of our return, but I don't necessarily have the same problem with Florida giving away their 2026 first that I did with Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think here, the 2026 first, you know, if that's all they can give, but they've also added the fourth and a plethora of prospects, I think that kind of equals out the value. So, I'm sorry, I was just talking myself through this, talking myself into it. I would say deal if I'm Doug Armstrong.
Good. And the difference between Tampa and Florida's window is just opening, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they made it to the finals last year. They could be in the finals for the next 2 or 3 years in a row here. Like, they've got a good window.
Well, they're also built differently though. So
yeah,
like with Tampa Bay, because they've had those star players forever, I don't know. I was always more confident that they were going to do damage in the playoffs. But with Florida, I know they're a good team and they're at the top of the NHL this year and they play playoff hockey. But I don't know, that they're just built differently. So I just don't want to say right now, because they're good, that I can see them being good for the next 5 years, because, you know, I also thought that Calgary was going to be good forever too. And then they essentially didn't change anything on their team. I mean, they had one pretty big change, the Tkachuk trade, but they essentially kept like a lot of good players and got a lot worse. So I don't know. I'm hesitant to say that I think Florida will be good for the next however long, but they are pretty damn good now, and they would get even better with Buchnevich, that's for sure. But in terms of their window, I really don't know, because I think they're just built differently than Tampa. Tampa was an anomaly, I think. Like, they had so much high-end scoring, and they still do, by the way, in Kucherov, who has like 40 more points than Braden Point, which is insane. But Tampa had high-end scoring. They had toughness down the lineup. They had like 4 legitimate, like, top 2 defensemen at one point, and they had the best goalie on the planet. So I'm just hesitant to put anyone else in that category for now. But all of that being said, Florida's a good team now. They will be good going forward, I think. And with Buchnevich, wow, that would be scary.
Yes, absolutely. And if I'm St. Louis, and if Florida calls, I'm assuming they have or will. They haven't already. If they call St. Louis about Buchnevich, if I'm Doug Armstrong, I'm asking about Anton Lundell in a potential deal.
For
100%.
sure.
I don't think Florida would want to do that.
No.
I thought about including him in this deal, but I really don't think they want to do that. I think they see him as another Barkov, potentially. So that is why I included a guy like Lusterine in this deal, who's a good player, and he's a roster guy, and plus it helps to make the money work as well.
Yeah. I just wonder if, I mean, now that I was gonna say something like, you know, I wonder if they added their back end instead, but I look at their back end, and now that everyone's healthy, maybe they don't need to add at all, you know? So I could definitely see it happening. But yeah, if you're Florida, you don't want to give up Lundell at all. I mean, his ceiling obviously isn't the same as Barkov, but he plays a similar style. You know, he's
learning from him, right?
Exactly.
So,
and he's going to be a good player for a long time. So I think that would be a mistake. Plus, he helps you right now. So you know, you would be getting worse to get better. in a sense, but I don't know. I don't think Lundell would make a lot of sense, even though if you're Doug Armstrong, like you said, that's the first guy you ask about.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right, well, there we go, man. Those three big names who could all go before or on deadline day: Jake Guentzel, Noah Hanifin, and Pavel Buchnevich. Some mock deals for you to digest. Let us know what you think. If they're really good, what could be worked on, or if they're flat out terrible. Give us all your feedback. And again, hopefully, nothing too big happens. Before or just after this episode is released. So anyway, thanks so much for listening to episode 202. Enjoy deadline day on Friday, and we will chat with you again.
This has been another episode of Boys in the Booth with Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. Connect with the Boys in the Booth on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Boys in the Booth. Visit boysinthebooth.com for show details. And don't forget, you can become a patron of the podcast for just $1 a month at patreon.com/boysinthebooth.